Here though.
Okay, so we got stuff. The speaker needs to go into here.
The speaker's Bluetooth. We can unplug it,
Okay.
and we're gonna put it over by them. Okay, so right. Look at this right now. I think we're good. Oh, you can see it right there. I think we're good there. Let's actually slide this back. So it's kind of about there. More?
Let's just not even have it.
Okay, right there. There. Right there. Good. That's good. And then you sit there so you can control with the remote between the trees. I'm gonna go. I just got it started.
Yeah, no, we don't have a tea time, right? Or we should go right. No, I did not.
Good.
I just have, I just went into the wrong.
I'll go to the bathroom in just. So what we need to do is hopefully, I need to double check. Oops. I want to get rid of that. I'm going to open my sound settings and I'm going to check that speakers, headphones.
Okay, so
Yep. So I got speakers, headphones.
these are the Zoom.
None? Yeah, those are the Zoom.
I was definitely clicking that. Does that do anything?
I don't think so. I think it's for some stuff that we don't do. Okay. Input, tone VO speaker, so that's that. So that should be the input.
Corners. So
Yep.
that into that.
So this we're gonna put in between them, probably on another chair.
Oh, it's a microphone.
It's a Bluetooth microphone and speaker.
You want a little black table or?
Yeah. Is there? So, box cast. Everybody's listening to me talk to you right now. Oh my.
So we can mute it.
Yeah.
cake. And again, a hearty welcome to all those who are new to the Episcopal Church and confirmed and everything. It's just fantastic to have everybody. I don't know if you saw the cake before it was cut into, but the cake said, "Welcome to the family." And that's truly what we're talking about here. We're all one big family here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a conversation with our bishop. We don't get him too often. He's been here twice, I think. He came once in the middle of COVID, and it was just like Bishop Craig and me and a few people in the church. It was very lonely. So this is much better. And then the last time Bishop Loya was here was for a visitation, but it was in the middle of the week. So this
Saturday.
Oh yeah, it was on a Saturday, right? So this is a whole lot better because I can get more of you guys out on a Sunday than on a Saturday. So I prepared a few questions, but I hope there will be time for you to ask questions as well. So Bishop, so I've listened to you a lot, and you talk a lot about sports.
Yeah.
I wonder if you ever played a sport.
Yeah, I didn't play a lot of sports. I ran cross country and track through high school. But I didn't. I played baseball as a kid and through like junior high school. But the only competitive sports I played in high school were track and cross country, and then didn't play any sports in college. So, but I've always been a lifelong sports fan.
Were you fast?
I think I was okay. Yeah, I don't like I didn't win the state championship or anything. Yeah.
So your second option was as
I was never going to make a career out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Bishop, you've encouraged all of us clergy and lay to come closer to Jesus and to engage in just some good basic discipleship. And I'm wondering whether you would be willing to talk a little bit about your own life as a disciple of Jesus. What were one or two pivotal moments in your life of faith? What are one or two spiritual practices that you do that kind of keep you on track?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. The only challenge is to keep that short. I think I would tell the story of maybe two moments that made a huge impact on my experience of Jesus. One of them, I grew up nominally Christian. So we were, sort of Christmas and Easter, we would go to church. And the church that we went to was First Lutheran Church in North Platte, Nebraska, which is in the western part of Nebraska. And on the occasions when we would go to church, the thing that I remember when I was probably 5 or 6 years old is I can remember every Sunday, or at least every Sunday, I probably did it like twice, but I remember it was every single Sunday. Pastor Van would invite all the kids to come up with the children's sermon. And I can remember going up to do the children's sermon with Pastor Van and how, in the literal sense of the word, awesome that was to be. I was so enchanted by the liturgy and by what he was saying, and just felt a real sense of God's presence in the way that I was invited as a 5-year-old to be seen in a space like that, which the church is probably not even as big as this room, but when I was a kid, it felt like it was, St. John the Divine Cathedral. The other piece about Pastor Van that I would say is that when I was in the first grade, I was hospitalized several times when I was in the first grade, and at least on one of those occasions, Pastor Van came to visit me in our hospital, which made a huge impact on me as a kid, because I didn't know that was a thing, as a kid. And I remember how much it meant to me to have this person who I knew from church that represented my emerging understanding of God, how much it meant that he was that he came to see me at a very difficult moment. So I remember that made a big impression. I think the other thing that made such a big impression on my discipleship was when I was in college, I had to take, I went to a small Presbyterian college in the middle of Nebraska. And so all that really meant is I had to take a religion course as part of my college degree. And I took an Old Testament course, and I was just utterly transfixed by it. It was the first time I had encountered the scriptures not as some weird collection of esoteric rules, and more as a coherent story about how God has this project to heal the whole world with love. And it wasn't like an indoctrination class. It was just the professor talking about what the Old Testament is. And that really made a huge impression on me, and was one of the ways deeply that I encountered God. So those were two, Pastor Van and that Old Testament course in college were two big moments.
Yeah. And then what do you do to stay on track?
Yeah, I would say if you're not doing this now, there is nothing that will make a bigger difference in your life than finding some small way, like 5 to 10 minutes every day, to spend time with Jesus. And for me, what that looks like primarily, it can look a lot of different ways in different seasons of my life, but what it looks like primarily is just about every day, I spend 20 minutes in a prayer practice that's called centering prayer, which is kind of a form of Christian meditation some of you are familiar with. As you can tell from me, I'm sort of a high energy person who loves being around people, and my job is very, I have to do a lot. Being a bishop requires an incredible amount of mental agility, because you're doing very different kinds of things in different situations. And so that practice of centering prayer allows me every day to just be quiet and to remember that I'm not God, and that I am, and it allows me to place myself and my day in God's presence. So that's a huge piece of my own discipleship, as well as I try to engage the scriptures every day. There's nothing that will make a bigger impact on our lives than allowing the story of God's project to heal the world with love to shape our imagination and how we encounter our day. So I try to spend some time every day dwelling in scripture, in addition to spending about 20 minutes in center prayer.
Thanks. Okay, so in your sermon, you talked about seeing the church from 30,000 feet, not literally, right? But sometimes.
I do fly a lot.
Yeah. But so what are you seeing? And how are we doing as the Episcopal Church? How are we doing here in Minnesota? What do you see just in general? What are you?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing at least 2 or 3 different things. I hope I'm not telling you anything you don't already know when I say that the landscape, the cultural landscape underneath the church has shifted dramatically in the last 50 years. So depending on how old you are and how long you've been in the church, there are some of you, I can imagine, who can remember a time when it was basically a cultural expectation that, or church participation was a sort of generalized cultural expectation in the United States. So a kind of example that I'll use of that is if in 1970, or maybe even as late as like 1989 or 1990, if you were at a dinner party, it would be pretty normal if someone asked you, where do you go to church? If you go to a dinner party this evening that's not for St. John's, and someone asks, or you were to ask someone, where do you go to church? They would think you were crazy, and they wouldn't talk to you. And so if for so long, the church was sustained financially and numerically because there was the cultural expectation that we were participating in the church. That is completely gone. If you attend a church, I don't mean to insult you with what I'm about to say, but if you attend church today, it makes you odd from a cultural perspective. And so what that means is that we can no longer depend on people coming to church and participating in church and financially giving to church simply because that's the thing that's done. Today, to be a follower of Jesus means you have to make an intentional and often countercultural choice. So what that means is that the systems and the structures and the institutional side of the church life is feeling some of that challenge, as I'm sure you're conscious of here at St. John's. There are in many Episcopal churches, like most Christian churches of any variety, fewer people than there were 50 years ago, which means there's less money than there was 50 years ago. And we're feeling that pinch. But I actually see this moment as a time of extraordinary hope and renewal, because what I'm seeing in congregations around the Episcopal Church is a deepening spiritual hunger, a deeper longing to know the person of Jesus, and a deeper commitment to bearing witness, like I was trying to say, to the way of Jesus in the world. So in terms of what I'm seeing from 30,000 feet, it's both a time of great challenge, a time of great transformation, and a time of great renewal around the church. So in the Diocese of Minnesota, we have all kinds of churches that are experimenting with new ways of reaching people with the good news of Jesus. What I was trying to say about the cultural change, it no longer works to just open the doors and say the Episcopal Church welcomes you, and then people are just going to find us and flood into us. We have to begin to meet people where they are and meet them on their terms. And there's a number of congregations around our diocese that are doing that in some pretty amazing ways, including St. John's.
Yeah. Great, thanks. So I know you know this, but maybe not everybody knows this. We have a general convention that's coming up this summer. It happens every 3 years. Our bishop will be there, Margaret Thor, our deacon will be there as well. And we're going to be electing a new presiding bishop, so that's a thing. But I'm wondering what do you see as like the hot ticket? What are the hot issues that you're going to see at convention?
Yeah, Margaret should also jump in. You all should know Margaret is not just part of our deputation. Margaret is the chair of our deputation, which is a big responsibility. And as you might imagine, she handles that magnificently. So I'm super grateful she's willing to do that ministry in addition to a number of other things. Obviously, the thing that most people in the church are paying attention to is we'll be electing a new presiding bishop. So the slate of 4 candidates who are going to be in that election was released recently. So that's probably the biggest, most public thing that will happen at General Convention will be the election of a new presiding bishop. In addition to that, I would say another thing that feels significant to me that may not feel immediately exciting and relevant to what happens week by week at St. John's, although I think over time it has the potential to really shape what's happening at St. John's, is we continue to look at liturgical reform. Prayer book reform continues to be a topic at General Convention. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, you can go to sleep for the next 35 seconds if you want to. I'll bring you back. Because what I'm saying is not going to sound that exciting, but it's deeply important. There's a proposal at this General Convention to change the constitution of the Episcopal Church that would redefine essentially what counts as the Book of Common Prayer. So the Book of Common Prayer is foundational to who we are as Episcopalians. That's a core piece of what it means to be Anglican Christians, this idea of common prayer. And so in 1970, if some of you were around the Episcopal Church in the 60s and 70s, you'll remember when the Book of Common Prayer was revised. So the Book of Common Prayer that we have right now was published in 1979. There was about a decade worth of process at the General Convention level that led to the 79 prayer book being published. That, I'm not speaking officially, I'm speaking, this is my opinion, that will never happen, that we will revise the Book of Common Prayer like that. The proposal at General Convention to change the Constitution would essentially create a process by which individual liturgies, a service for Holy Saturday or a service for a wedding or whatever, a new service for Sunday morning, would be approved through a similar process and then would become the same status as the prayer book. So depending on your level of engagement with church governance, that may sound like the most boring thing you've ever heard that I just described, but it will impact, I think, how we worship together in the Episcopal Church and what that idea of common prayer means. So whether that's interesting to you or not, I think that not next fall, but over the next 3, 6, 10 years, that will certainly, depending on how all that shakes out, certainly be seen. That'll fill up in some of your conversations and worship at St. John's without question.
Yeah. So the 79 prayer book is going to be like, if it passes, that'll be like the last.
Yeah, I think that's what's significant is that, the 1979 prayer book that we just worshiped is not going anywhere. No one's getting rid of it, but it will really be the last time, I would imagine it's the last time that we have a physical Book of Common Prayer. Like, this is the Book of Common Prayer for the Episcopal Church. In the future, as we talk about the prayer book over the next 3, 6, 10 years, what we will really be referring to is a kind of collection of liturgical resources that live online.
Yeah. So when I watch the news, I mean, obviously the General Convention of the Episcopal Church is the headline news that I see. But a secondary thing that I sometimes hear is that there's an election coming up this year. And it's a big election, as you know. It's contentious, tumultuous times. People here at St. John's are on both ends of the spectrum with this. So maybe this might be a conversation you and I can have further too. But how do we hold together as a parish family in the midst of these really difficult and challenging times? Do you have some advice for us?
I do, and in some ways, this political season is like recent years in our country, extraordinarily complex, right? The political topography in this country is just layers and layers of complexity to it, and I have no doubt that you see much, if not all, of that complexity reflected within the membership of St. John's. But our call as disciples of Jesus is actually very, very simple. We do not worship the President of the United States as Lord. We do not worship the Congress as Lord. We do not worship a political party as Lord. We worship Jesus Christ as Lord. And we just made promises to follow the way of Jesus Christ. So in a time of great complexity and division, our call is to stay focused on what does Jesus call us to do? How does Jesus call us to be? Not, and it's not that the politics or the partisan politics are unimportant, but they're essentially important issues. But we are not called as followers of Jesus to be Republicans. We are not called as followers of Jesus to be Democrats. We are called to follow the way of Jesus and what the way of Jesus invites us into. So I think that's critically important because I think we as Christians have a critical witness in the life of the nation at this point that is a third way. It's not the way of being Republican or being Democrat. It's the way of love. So I would say keep referring back to Jesus. The thing about following Jesus, I'm going to say something that's controversial. It's going to sound controversial. I just think it's true. Is the gospel is always political. And when I say the gospel is political, I mean the gospel has to do with the real world, how we actually live our lives together in the world, how we manage our resources together in the world. That's politics. The gospel is never partisan. The gospel is always political. It deals with real stuff in the real world. It is never partisan. Jesus is never endorsing this political party or that political party. And if that wasn't controversial enough, I think what I'll say is that there's a real danger in this moment in our national life whenever any political party, right, left, in between, doesn't matter, whenever a political party tries to wrap itself in the name of Jesus while ignoring the actual message of Jesus, that is extraordinarily dangerous. And so I think part of our role is to be authentic to who Jesus really is in this moment. So in terms of what does that mean in a diverse parish like St. John's, or just a diverse neighborhood like we all live in, or the diverse nation that we live in, I think one of the most terrifying things that I see in our national life is how quick we are to outrage and scorn. And it's one thing to hold political or partisan positions and hold those passionately because they're important and they really matter. It's another thing when we begin to dismiss someone else who's a neighbor in front of us as a bad person and begin to regard them with scorn. So a parable that you all can study together to answer your question is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The parable of the Good Samaritan is someone is beat up and robbed and left for dead on the side of the road. And who is it? Pop quiz. Who is it that helps the Samaritan? Right. Or who is it that helps the person on the side of the road? The Samaritan. I gave the answer. And the Samaritan, it's not incidental. The Samaritan was like, I've heard the presiding bishop do this. I'm not going to be able to do it as artfully as he did. He gets away with it. It would be like saying, Joe Biden's supporter was beat up and left on the side of the road. And the leader of the Democratic Party walked by and went over to the other side of the road. And then the leader of the state DFL walked by and then the Trump supporter came and bandaged his wounds and took him to the inn and paid for him to stay there. Right? Or flip it on, the other direction. Either way, the point of the parable of the Good Samaritan is it was the person who was the enemy, or who regarded the person on the side of the road as the enemy, who exercised not just compassion, but sort of scandalous generosity. So I guess what I would pose as kind of as a challenge is how do we not regard one another across all of our divisions with scorn? How do we follow Jesus' command to love our neighbor, which is to engage our neighbors not with scorn, but with extravagant generosity?
Good answer. Brent, can I ask you to be the person to bring the microphone around to people?
Sure.
Okay. I figured you'd say yes. So, not to put you on the spot or anything, but now it's time for any questions. He's got the answers. So, yeah. So here you go. If you have money problems, he's got the answer.
How do the duties of the presiding bishop differ from what you do?
Yeah. So it's a great question. My title is I'm a bishop diocesan. We have lots of different kinds of bishops in the Episcopal Church. I'm a bishop diocesan, which means I'm the bishop. That's a canonical role. I'm the bishop who's in charge of the diocese. You have other kinds of bishops who have other roles. Or my predecessor, Brian Pryor, who was the bishop of Minnesota, is now the assistant bishop in Alabama. Which means he's a bishop in Alabama, but he's not the bishop in Alabama. The presiding bishop, it's an interesting question, and I'm not going to be able to give you a quick answer to. The presiding bishop, historically, is the president of the House of Bishops. So the General Convention, the highest governing authority in our church, two houses, just like Congress, House of Deputies, which Margaret's a part of, she's the chair of our deputations, and the House of Bishops, which I'm a part of as a bishop. So any piece of legislation that passes, like this liturgical thing that I'm talking about, has to pass in both of those houses, just like ours. So both of those houses have a president. There's the president of the House of Deputies, a woman whose name is Julia Ioannis, and the president of the House of Bishops is the presiding bishop. The presiding bishop in the last 30 or 40 years, that role has begun to take on additional responsibilities. There's a church-wide staff at the Episcopal Church Center, so the presiding bishop is sort of the head of the church-wide staff. The presiding bishop has some canonical responsibilities, just like my canonical responsibility is to do visitations like this to congregations. The presiding bishop does that, visits every diocese. But really, the presiding bishop has less concrete authority and responsibility than a diocesan bishop does. But because we don't have a centralized hierarchy, But the presiding bishop, as Michael Curry has demonstrated, has an extraordinary amount of influential authority. So the presiding bishop can kind of set, what is it we're talking about as a church? What is it we're working on as a church? What are our priorities as a church? So I hope that answers your question. Presiding bishop has a lot of other roles than that, but in some ways they're the chief pastor of the Episcopal Church. And so their biggest authority is moral and relational and influential and prophetic.
And they're a first assistant.
What's that?
You're a first assistant bishop, kind of, sort of.
Well, sort of. I mean, our polity really is, we're kind of a federation of more or less autonomous dioceses who are accountable to the General Convention. So the presiding bishop doesn't really have any direct authority over diocesan bishops outside of if a bishop misbehaves, it's misconduct. You want to add?
No, I just want to say that presiding bishop is elected by the House of Bishops and confirmed by the
That's
Trust Deputy.
That's right. So both the two houses, they both have a president. The deputies elect the president of the House of Deputies, and the bishops confirm that election. And then the bishops elect the presiding bishop, and the deputies confirm that election. So, yeah.
How many congregations are you able to visit? And will you be visiting us again soon?
The bad news for you is you don't have a choice about whether I visit or not. So the canons require that every bishop diocesan visit every congregation within their diocese once every 3 years. That's the thing. What I have been doing with Jessica's help is that I'm on about an every 2-year visitation schedule, not 3 years. We have 93 congregations and about 7 or 8 institutions, a couple of schools, charitable foundation, Episcopal homes in St. Paul, those kinds of things. So those roughly 100 faith communities, I'm visiting about half of those every year. So you will see me again in roughly another, like not next year, but the year after. So it's kind of an every other year cycle, which is a weird thing because that's on the one hand a long time. On the other hand, doing between 45 and 50 visitations in a year is about as many as I can possibly do. So yeah, but that's the answer. But every diocesan bishop is required to visit every congregation, not less than once a week.
Thank you.
My question goes back to one of your first things you talked about, smaller population, people come to church, and less revenue. Two areas. One, what's the diocese doing on taking down the cost? Our notion, again, I have had this discussion many times. I get it, it's saying a franchise fee. How does that mean? You see it including the other one there. What are we doing about looking at doing away with quote church insurance and going to the open marketplace in order to get cheaper, better insurance than what we currently have?
Yeah, I'll try to answer those questions, and I'll try to answer the first one, or the second one first. We talked about this at the vestry meeting, and I don't want to bore everybody who's not interested in this, but the shortest thing is she's asking about the cost of medical insurance. So I didn't anticipate that I would talk to you both about the constitution of the Episcopal Church and about how we do medical insurance in the Episcopal Church. Not sure that's the thing that I imagined I'd be talking about today. But the shortest possible explanation I can give is that every diocese in the Episcopal Church and every parish that's a member of one of those dioceses in the Episcopal Church, it's required for the health insurance it provides for both its clergy and lay employees to use the church medical trust or the church medical insurance. Those costs are very high, as you can imagine, and so the only way that can be changed is at the level of general convention. So we can't at the diocesan level just change that and go find a different plan. And there's many of us, as I said, the vestry that are wanting to work on that. We see it, we feel it in the diocesan budget. I see it in your budgets. So much longer, but that's who has the authority to change that. And in terms of how we are containing costs, every congregation pays basically an assessment to the diocese every year, and we as a diocese pay an assessment to the Episcopal Church every year. Just like you make a pledge to your parish makes a pledge to the diocese, we make a pledge to the wider church. And that amount is set every year by the diocesan convention, which is all the clergy, elected delegates. The formula by which those assessments are calculated hasn't changed in a very long time. If an individual it's one of the things of our system, that if an individual congregation's revenue is growing, the assessment's going to grow because the formula is based on the revenue. The formula hasn't changed. I'm trying to do everything I can, and I'm sure lots of people would have different perspectives on how effectively we're doing this right now. I'm committed to trying to do everything I can to keep as many resources as possible at the local level, because I think that's when ministry happens. So we have a smaller diocesan staff now than when I got here. I'm not sure if we had a smaller staff than we have now. I'm not sure we could actually do the work that the diocese needs us to do, right? So we're kind of at that balancing point. So we're doing everything we can in terms of the diocesan budget to contain costs. I will tell you that the diocesan staff, who are the ones, obviously like any institution, that are operating programs, I'm constantly humbled and blown away at how hard they work to keep costs down. So we have whatever's budgeted. In most of our program areas, we come in most years under what we budgeted, and that's because staff works really hard to conserve those resources. So it's probably a lot more complicated than that. I'm not sure that answers your question, but that's some other perspective. Yeah.
Other questions?
Where do you live? What's your TV family like?
Yeah, so we live in Chanhassen, and so I have my wife is Melissa. My wife's name is Melissa. She is Hebrew Bible and Old Testament scholar. She teaches at a United Methodist seminary that is based in Kansas City, though 90% of the teaching is virtual. And we have 2 kids. We have Asa as our 8-year-old son, and Mari is our 13-year-old daughter. So yeah, thank you. And I'm not sure if you caught this in the sermon or not, but I grew up in Nebraska. And my wife, Melissa, also grew up in Nebraska. I grew up in the western part of the state. She grew up in Lincoln. We never knew each other. We met in Connecticut when we were both in seminary. So first thing she said to me, we had a class together my first year in seminary. And she overheard me talking to someone. So the first thing she says, "Oh, you're the other person in the parking lot that has Nebraska license plate."
Other questions? There's one back there. Amy's got.
This is kind of a big question, and I'm not quite sure how to frame it. It's probably a subject for many sermons. I'm just thinking about, I wonder about what Jesus tells us, or maybe doesn't tell us, about interacting with other faiths, and especially in these times when there's, persecution going on, and, traditions are kind of clashing and affecting how people think about the world. What do you understand as our role in a multi-faith world?
That's such a great question. Thank you for asking it. So important right now. Actually, 2 things. The first one is that Jesus basically says nothing about any other religion. And the reason for that is that Jesus was Jewish. He was born Jewish. He died Jewish. His first followers were Jewish. So everything that is recorded about Jesus, he never, nor did his first followers, ever imagine they were having a conversation about anything other than an intimate conversation about Judaism. It's only later that Christianity really evolved into this, from a sect within Judaism into its own religion. So Jesus really says nothing about other religions, but because he was having a conversation about one religious tradition. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that I have learned that anytime religion, I think you could go back to Art's other question and say politics, or partisan politics too, you could just interchange them. Anytime religion loses its humility, it becomes dangerous. What do I mean by that? The opposite of faith, so we're people of faith. We have faith in Jesus. And the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. Certainty. The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. I don't need to believe in gravity. It's just a scientific fact, right? It doesn't need my belief. So I think as people of faith, what do I mean by when it loses its humility? It means that we're Christians. I'm a Christian leader. It means my business is teaching the Christian faith and doing what I can to lead and serve the Christian community in the Diocese of Minnesota. It's not in my job description or my expertise or the promises that I made to be in the business of deciding what other religions are doing or not doing or should be doing or not be doing. What I do feel like as a follower of Jesus, it's my job, it's to encounter other religions from a place of humility, meaning what do I have to learn from them? What do they see that I might not see? And it's also my absolute obligation as a follower of Jesus to be cultivating friendships with people who differ from me in every imaginable way. And so what I think our call from an interfaith perspective as Christians is to be cultivating, tolerance and humility and friendship with people of other traditions, which I think we can do that without in any way compromising the fact that, like, what we just did in there, I really believe that it's true. And I can encounter other traditions from a perspective of what do they have to teach me about the world, what do they have to teach me about my own tradition. A quick story is that when I was dean of the cathedral in Omaha before I was elected bishop here, and while I was in Omaha, I had a number of friends, one particular close friend who is a rabbi in Omaha, and we became friends because our daughters were in the same class at their school. So I'd see him most days dropping the kids off at school. We'd have lunch together. It was like an extraordinarily enriching friendship because we were both pastors. So even though it's different religions, like being the pastor of a local community is kind of the same. You get the same fights, you get the same challenge, you get the same, whatever. And I think that's really helpful to encounter other traditions. It's from a place of humility and friendship. It's a great question.
Probably have time for this last question. Jackie.
Bishop, what brought you to the Episcopalian Church? If I understand you right, you did not start there.
I did not. I became an Episcopalian when I was in college, and try to tell that story quickly. I think when I told you about that Old Testament course that I took in college, which really sort of opened my mind. Faith was not a thing in my consciousness before I took that class, really, and that made me want to learn more. And I found myself feeling when I was in college sort of a longing to be part of a community and a tradition. And so I'm still weird. I was a pretty weird college student. I was really systematically in college, kind of looking at different Christian traditions to try to, to sort of see what feels like a fit for me. And so when I found the Episcopal Church, it's a pretty typical story that probably many of you in this room have too, if you didn't grow up in the Episcopal Church, which I loved the ancient tether that we have. So we're not doing something that we just made up yesterday, right? We're stewarding this very rich way of following Jesus that we've inherited from people who came before us. And there's an expansiveness to change, openness to change and encountering difference and holding different positions and perspectives and tension together. That's a pretty typical story, but that's really what made me fall in love with the Episcopal Church. Yeah.
Great. I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. That was helpful on so many levels. So
I came once in the middle of COVID to do a Between the Trees, and it's such a great and hilarious idea, and it's still one of my favorite moments of my first 3.5 years or so as bishop is the Between the Trees during COVID here. It's a great idea to get to do a live show. Between the Trees is an even better privilege. So I want to say one more time. I know we're out of time. I want to say one more time how grateful I am for all of you. How grateful I am for Art and Margaret and Kate and your lay leadership, who I got to spend some time with this morning. This is really an extraordinary place. And I know that in this moment, for all the political reasons, for all the cultural reasons, it is not an easy time to be a local community. And I am so grateful. There's nothing that matters more in the economy of God than what you all do gathered here week by week and Sunday by Sunday. So thanks.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Art.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know.